book arose when Tega and I were at a festival together where they had a session specifically for teaching code and art education. And we were sort of planning our fall curriculum and realized that we were both planning some of the same assignments. And furthermore, that the assignments that we were both planning were part of a kind of an unwritten canon of sort of classic assignments that had been passed down to us by our teachers and by our friends, or that we had been using for years ourselves. And when we realized that we both had this kind of common vocabulary of assignments and exercises that were sort of classic, but never sort of written down, we realized that maybe writing them down would be something that we could distill from the assignments that we and our friends had given, and then return to our community as something that they could use themselves. And this was particularly something that we felt was sort of urgent in a way, because so many of the kinds of online curricula that people in our community make are very fragile. They're digital courses that exist, but then maybe the web pages go away after a year or two. So we wanted to make sure that we captured these kinds of assignments and ways that, or really, and sort of inspirational ways that people had responded to those assignments, as a way of sort of, we could sort of share that back with people and say, here are some kinds of classic things that people do in order to learn sort of fundamental principles in our field. And then here are some really interesting ways that some artists and designers have responded to those prompts. There's sort of like three main sections in the book. And I'd love to share those with people, because I think many people have seen the very attractive cover, but they don't actually know what's on the inside. And so for that reason, I'd love to kind of share kind of what the overall structure of the book is. And so just first of all, you may notice that there's kind of this green section here. And that's a section of very short exercises, we call them, that, you know, where, for example, here, like 10 print, you're achieving this kind of sort of graphic. And, you know, there may or may not be, there may be more than one way of doing it, but there's sort of a few sort of right answers, even independent of what programming language you're doing them in. The second kind of bigger thing that we have is something like, let me find a good example, sort of classic assignment prompts like the clock. And so here's, you know, there's clock, and the way this would work as a chapter is that first we sort of have a sort of large inspirational picture, and then we describe kind of a brief over here where we say, like, design a clock that displays a novel or unconventional representation of time. We talk about learning objectives, and this uses sort of terminology that a lot of people may have to use when creating curricula that they have to submit to their departments or their universities for approval. So having sort of ready-made learning objectives articulated here, it could be very helpful for a lot of educators. We talk about some variations, some of the ways that the assignment can be varied creatively depending on the level of sophistication that the students have. And it's important to point out that this assignment is something that could be done by introductory students or very advanced, you know, professionals. It's all, there's no specific level to this. And then we have a section called Making It Meaningful, where we sort of talk about, like, well, when one makes a clock, for example, or when one makes one of these assignments, like, how does one go about making it sort of poignant or relevant or interesting? And then we have typically a bunch of examples, a few pages of examples by that we think are sort of inspirational. And then finally, we have a long list of additional projects and readings that are sort of like links to other things out there in the world that people can easily Google and then sort of find more information about, because we couldn't include pictures of, you know, literally thousands of projects. Finally, the third thing that the book has is a set of interviews with a bunch of our peers. And so there's, I think, what, Tega, like 6 or 8 interviews? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it's 8 or 9 actually.
Yeah, and they're on different topics, like, you know, encouraging a point of view, like, you know, how do you encourage meaning making, criticality, perspective, and heart in otherwise techno-formal education? And, you know, these are interviews with a bunch of people who are sort of shown here, and they sort of are almost like co-authors of the book with us, because they are sort of a brain trust of our peers who have a lot to say in this field are really experienced artist, educator, designers who have themselves pioneered these assignments and curricula for new media arts and design education. So those are the sort of three sections. There's sort of like small exercises, large assignments, and then sort of interviews to kind of, you know, if you're just finding yourself teaching this for the first time, or if you've been teaching for a while and you've sort of lost your way, like these kinds of help ground you in like in how your peers can think about this.
The book contains assignments and references to projects and reading lists and exercises that would be useful in computational art classes and computational design classes. So it really addresses the question of how to teach and how to practice these sorts of like artistic and design practices where you're working with software and technology. And yeah, so the book itself is language agnostic. It can be used for a number of different platforms because obviously this is something that's changing a lot. But really like brings together like the work that's happened in these fields over the past sort of couple of decades, really.
People who are educating, like high school educators in computer science, who would like to reach their students in a new way and maybe meet their students in a new place by integrating the education of programming concepts, by integrating that with sort of cultural premises and sort of creative premises.
There obviously has been a lot of activity in terms of developing new curriculum and new syllabus at a high school level for introducing students to computational literacies, programming, coding in different ways. I think we were also very interested in addressing these sorts of communities where maybe there's a better way we can be teaching programming that's not about like recreating accounting software and doing these kind of very dry activities that have been the sort of bread and butter of how a lot of this stuff has been taught for a long time. And so, you know, our book is full of these like very creative prompts that guide students and educators through how you might, you know, use programming to create like, you know, visual outcomes or interactive outcomes, or like create poetry and delight and have it be a sort of more open-ended and yeah, culturally engaged process.